planning a trip like that and then executing on the trip is actually a lot like starting a business. I look at a business as like a little adventure you do. Stuff goes wrong, you plow through that. So there's a lot of parallels for me between travel and business. And, it's all just, living, which kind of gets back to your original question.
Hi, I'm Brilliant, your host for this show. I know that I'm incredibly blessed. As the son of self-made billionaires, I've seen the high price some people pay for success, and I've learned that money really can't buy happiness. But I've also had the good fortune to learn directly from many of the world's leading teachers. I created this podcast and the School for Good Living to share what I've learned and to keep exploring the question, what does it mean to live a good life, and how can we do it? Despite my privilege, I lived for decades in a pretty dark place, and I know that living is often a painful, difficult, and messy business. But I also know that it can be wonderful beyond imagination, and that it's a skill at which we can improve. That's why every episode is a conversation with an author who's an expert regarding spirituality, health, relationships, work, rest and play, or money. I also ask my guests about their creative habits, routines, and mindsets, and what they've done to get their books written, published, and read. If you're ready to be, do, have, and give more, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Are you looking for more balance, more productivity, more enjoyment from your work? Would you like to get more out of life? Reduce office politics and burnout for yourself and your team? If you answered yes to any of those questions, I think you'll be interested in today's guest. His name is Stephan Aarstol. He wrote a book called The Five-Hour Workday, Live Differently, Unlock Productivity, and Find Happiness. But this isn't a book full of theory. Instead, this is a book sharing his experience as Stephan has grown his company, one that Mark Cuban invested in back in 2012. Mark made a $150,000 investment for 30% of Stephan's company, which has since produced more than $40 million in revenue. It's called Tower Beach Club. They produce surfboards, stand-up paddleboards, skateboards, e-bikes. They even have an event venue in San Diego. But what I love about Stephan and his work is that he questions everything. Now, if you're like me, you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Fair Labor Standards Act. But if you know about it, back in 1940, Congress passed a law making the 40-hour workweek a law. In that same way that the 40-hour workweek was created, Stephan asks, why not have a 5-hour workday? It's something that he implemented. He says that in every day after he and his team implemented this, they were able to accomplish in just 2 to 3 hours what used to take them 8 to 10. He writes, if you reduce the number of hours you have to dedicate toward a task, it magically leads you to thinking of new ways to get it done. So, Stephan has a lot of interesting insights, a lot of great experience, a lot of which he challenges you and invites you to apply in your own business. You can learn more about Stephan and his work at towerbeachclub.com, at 5hourworkday.com, and you can find him on all the socials, Tower Beach Club on all the socials. With that, I hope you enjoy and benefit from this conversation with my new friend, Stephan Aarstol. Oh, I forgot to tell you that Stephan has written for and been featured in many of the leading business publications, including Fast Company, Entrepreneur, Inc., Forbes, The Washington Post, and so on. So with that, I hope you enjoy this conversation with my new friend, Stephan Aarstol. Stephan, welcome to the School for Good Living.
Hey, thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Will you tell me, please, what's life about?
I think life is about just, experiencing stuff, seeing the world. I mean, it's like an adventure, kind of.
I think so. And that answer, coming from you and what you've built has a different ring to it for me than just, I don't know, if one of my high school buddies had said that.
Sure.
Right? And part of it is you talk about adventure. I know you spent some time in Australia long before this, right? Will you talk about what motivated you and what was your experience there like? What did you learn?
Yeah, that was my first real long-term travel, backpacker type travel stuff. And I did it with 3 college buddies. And, growing up in the US above Seattle, small town, you get a certain view of the world. And then when you go out into the world, and Australia was an interesting place because we were meeting Australians, but we were also on this backpacker tour where it was mostly Europeans and really people from all over the world, but primarily Europeans. So you just get a much different perspective hanging out with those people and we were there for 3 months. So that sort of opened my mind up to, the world of travel, but also the, hand in hand with travel is just stuff going wrong. and, dealing with stuff going wrong. And after a while, just learning to accept that stuff goes wrong, you just plow through it. And planning a trip like that and then executing on the trip is actually a lot like starting a business. It's like I look at a business as like a little adventure you do. Stuff goes wrong, you plow through that. And so there's a lot of parallels for me between travel and business. And, it's all just, living, which kind of gets back to your original question.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if your experience is the same, but for me, it's interesting how when it's happening, it's just going wrong or it's crap. But after, with the benefit of perspective, then it's adventure.
Yeah, exactly. This is something that I learned from travel. And it's funny, when I was on Shark Tank, I'm sort of known for the worst pitch in the history of Shark Tank that still landed the deal. And we went out there and I forgot my lines and it went really bad. But in that moment, I was, you're kind of in your head. I'm thinking, oh man, like 6 million people are going to see this. This is going to be horrible. But then I'm sort of thinking back to my, travels and thinking every time something goes really bad on a vacation or some trip, that's the most memorable part.
Yeah.
So and once you can flip that in your mind, you're good. And I've been able to do that years before because I've been an entrepreneur for maybe 10 years before I was on the that show. And so when that happened, I was just like, oh yeah, this is going to be that time I really remember. So you just screwed up in front of 6 million people, but don't even worry about it. That's and once you can do that as an entrepreneur, you kind of become bulletproof. So, like the recession hits here, the coronavirus, you just take those things in stride after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's evolve or die, rise above it. One of my teachers, he talks about all of life is dynamic movement. You either rise above it or you get crushed by it.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of times when it's happening, like you're saying, all you see is sort of chaos and you see the bad side of it. But, the flip side of that is there's opportunity in chaos,
Yeah. I do want to ask you about the Shark Tank experience and what's happened since then. But before we go there, I want to ask you about a fish you caught when you were a young man that had, I don't know that it changed the trajectory of your life, but reading your book, it sounded like maybe it did.
Yeah. So I'd fished with my father, like, my entire childhood. I mean, he was the big fisherman and he just sort of drug us 3 kids along. And, and like a hardcore fisherman where he'd go out, 4 a.m. and he'd stay out for 12 hours, he loved fishing. Right. And so we would just sort of, be seasick and, sunburnt and make it through the day. And I think my brothers had stopped even going out fishing after a while, but I was out of grad school and I was in my first job and I would come home for the summer and Dad would want to go out fishing. So I would, go along with him. On this trip, I went along with him. It was out to a place called Nia Bay on the sort of on the very tip of Washington State there. One of the best fishing places in the world. Anyway, and we caught this just massive fish. It was 58-pound salmon, which if you're a salmon fisherman, is a huge fish. This is the biggest fish in the state of Washington in 20 years. And the biggest fish I had caught before that was probably 25 pounds. So this is 2.5 times. I mean, it's just like, this is like winning the lottery. It's just a freak accident, And so anyway, we caught that fish. We brought it in. It's sort of an Indian village out there where you fish at. And, they were like, holy cow, because that's how they make their money. It's a tourist town for the fishing people that come out there. So they saw this fish as like a prize fish. So, we were taking pictures of the fish, like at the little fish stand. And then, it was a small town. So pretty soon, like news was all over the town about this massive fish that this kid had caught. And they offered me $500 for the fish, and I was like, well, let me think about that. We went home. We decided, my dad sort of talked over. We decided we would negotiate for moorage for our moorage for life for our boat in their harbor. We'd give them the fish for free, but then we could, come here and park our boat here, and they'd have to hang the fish up in their little bait and tackle shop. That was the deal. And they said, yeah, we'll totally do that. The next day we learned they would have paid $5,000 for that fish. And this is when I was out of college, so $5,000 was a lot. And I had just started my first business maybe 6 months prior to that on the side, and I was still doing my day job. But that business was kind of taking off, and it was getting to that decision point of should you jump off and do your own business or not. And my wife at the time was pregnant, and our baby was about 6 months away. So even more stress to go out on your own. But I caught that fish. I took that as a sign. That's just, it's a 1 in 10 million, odds to hit that. And I'm like, that's a sign. I'm going to start this business. I think I mailed in my resignation letter from the trip.
Wow,
and
that's
said,
amazing.
I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna give it a try. And I've been an entrepreneur ever since.
That is great. And do you still have the moorage up there for the boat?
Well, the Indian tribes, they sort of like changed chiefs. And so that's kind of gone away. They have a picture of the fish in the shop, but
Okay.
I don't know where the fish disappeared to. But they would take that fish and they would take it around to like their trade shows or fishing shows. And so maybe it's on the road or something like that. But no, the
Wow.
moorage thing, we just kind of let that go. But
Right on. Well, you just talked about your dad being a fisherman. I understand your dad was also a doctor and an entrepreneur. Sounds like a pretty interesting guy and one of your biggest teachers. What did you learn from him that's influenced your career?
yeah, well, he's technically a doctor, but I think when people think of an optometrist, they don't think, oh, that's not a real doctor. And then, but it's not a real like doctor too, because they sell glasses. They sell glasses and contact. That's about half of the business. The other half is like seeing patients and doing stuff like that. It would be like if you're going to a doctor and they sell like bone splints, and that's, the good money they make by selling you, product in addition to their services. So I sort of learned through that. It was like, he was basically an entrepreneur struggling with stuff. I think he went bankrupt at one point, just watching him go from one building to the next, have to build this out, staff problems and stuff like that. And it was just sort of an interesting thing to see. So I think I learned just by being in that environment.
Yeah, maybe gave you a sense of what to expect as you embarked on your own journey, perhaps.
Yeah.
And you also have a friend, or had a friend when you were younger, Mason, right? I wonder, you talk about him being influential early in your book, and I realize here, let me interject about the book, because we haven't even talked about the book yet. Of course, the listener will hear it in the intro, but you've written a book called The 5-Hour Workday: Live Differently, Unlock Productivity, and Find Happiness, right? And in the book, as any author of a book that I would want to read, goes beyond just telling me what to do or even why I should do it, but shares from his or her experience, and you share some experience as a young boy and your friend Mason, and how you learned from him something that changed you. Will you talk about who he was and what you've learned?
Yeah, so he was sort of one of my first best friends, really, when I was a kid, like all the way through, we went to kindergarten together. I don't know if we knew each other before that. I think we were kind of in the same town, and we went to kindergarten in town. And, through first grade, and you don't have a huge, friend circle at that point. And in second grade, he ended up getting leukemia. I mean, basically, he just like threw up blood on the bus one day. And then, like a week later, we find out he's got leukemia. And then, a couple months later, he's out of school. A couple months later, he comes back. He's got no hair. And I'm still sort of seeing him outside of school in all of this. So I sort of witnessed him, go through that sort of child leukemia as like a friend. But, I'm perfectly fine over here. He's going through like all of this, crap on this side. And he basically just had to fight it. And I think today your prognosis, if you got leukemia as a kid, is much better. But back then, this was in the, the late 70s. It was not pretty good. I mean, this was kind of a death sentence. And he kind of knew that was coming at, the age of 7, maybe 8. And they said, basically you got a year to live or 2 years to live or something like that. But just sort of, riding shotgun in that experience. And at the same time that my life was going, pretty good. Both of us had, I had my parents divorced at the time, and his parents were married, but then his father died, in like a freak accident. He was like a crab fisherman up in Alaska, and he died on like a 3-wheeler accident. And so he went through that. So the kid's got cancer, then his dad dies, and then his mom is left, a single mom. She ends up having to marry sort of, an asshole, like a stepfather, and he's having to deal with that. I have the sort of the asshole stepfather on my side too. So we shared a lot of those things. And then my stepfather and my mom got divorced, and then my original parents ended up remarrying together. So my life came back together really in a tight little bow.
Yeah.
Right.
That's like every child of divorce, that's their dream, right?
Sure. Yeah. And as a kid, you think you kind of willed that into, fruition, so I'm thinking, well, I'm just making, stuff happen over here on this side. And his life is just, more and more deteriorating. And then he had to switch schools, and, it was just sort of, there's no good way to end cancer, I think. It was very, painful experience. He was breaking a lot of bones, but through the whole thing, like he was the most chipper kid like ever, and he was very knowledgeable. He was still learning. He didn't just sort of give up on life. He just said, like, my adventure is just a little shorter, than everybody else's. And so that was sort of a really interesting thing to see, like a perspective.
Yeah.
They say if you ever get cancer yourself and you make it through that, it totally changes your life perspective, right?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't actually go through that, but it was about as close as you could to doing that by seeing that and seeing him sort of, and my other friends were complaining about something stupid, little issue that was sort of a non-issue. This kid, died when he was 13, and he was like, a champion sort of the whole way through. And to me, that was sort of inspiring. At the same time, it sort of showed me that we're in a world of people that sort of complain about stuff that they really shouldn't be complaining about. And, the sort of the correct way to live is just say, life is short and you should just enjoy it while you're here. We all basically have a death sentence. Some are just longer than others, and you really don't know when your time's up. And I think if you approach life that way, it's a much better way to live. And I think that is exactly what he taught me, is just, here's how you should live,
Wow. On the one hand, what a tragedy, but also what a gift. Like, how beautiful, to really get that at a young age. So,
it's an interesting thing. And time is relative. So you can say like he had like a really rough life, but maybe he had just amazing life and it was just shorter,
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, let me ask you now about the Shark Tank experience, because I understand, and I Googled that, by the way. I Googled worst Shark Tank pitches ever. And what I learned was there's a whole bunch of really crappy ones, of course, that never got funded. But yours, I couldn't find yours. So I don't think you need to stress too much. It wasn't on page 1 of Google.
That's good news.
Yeah.
It's been a few years, because we were on in season 3. I think they're in season 10 or 11 now. So hopefully we've got drowned it out.
Yeah, like 2011 or 2012, something like that.
2012 was when it aired. We actually pitched in 2011. 2011. There's like a 9-month lapse between when we pitch and when you air back then.
Yeah. So your pitch was for stand-up paddleboards. Is that right?
Yeah. Tower paddleboards.
Tower paddleboards. And Cuban ended up investing in your company 30% for $150,000.
Yep.
And you have since generated more than $30 million. If I understand.
More than 40 million now.
More than 40 million now. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. It's been a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've not only created a successful business, but you are advancing ideas, which not every capitalist does. Many people seem content to go to work, find a need and fill it, make a profit margin, whatever. And nothing wrong with that. But I'm particularly intrigued by those who are encouraging us to find more intelligent or better ways to live and work. And I believe that you're doing that. And it seems that one of your primary vehicles for that, I know you speak a lot and you write a number of articles, but your book, as I've mentioned, the 5-Hour Workday, Live Differently, Unlock Productivity, and Find Happiness. Why did you write this book? Who did you write it for? What did you want it to do for them?
Yeah, and I think the book is just a larger part of this. Like earlier, you talked about how my father sort of influenced what I do. He was an optometrist, so he saw it was this business of helping people. He honestly wasn't in it to just make a ton of money. I mean, he wanted to make enough money to, have a nice fishing boat, nice house and vacations, whatever that. But he really was not motivated by that. And he was almost like, disgusted by people that were just purely motivated by that. And I remember one time he said to me, and this was just in passing, just driving down the street, he said something to the effect of, like, any asshole can be a millionaire. I mean, and he was talking to me because I was talking about starting a business or doing something like that, right? And that was his exact quote: any asshole can be a millionaire. And there was this sort of indignation that I would try something for the sake of doing it for money. And what he was, the underpinning of that, or if I read between the lines, was he was saying, like, look, you kids are talented. I put you in a position to do this. He's like, don't waste your talent on just trying to make money. Mm-hmm. He's like, you can do that in your sleep. He's like, do that and contribute. Because essentially is what he was saying. And I don't think he meant it to be this like really like important, thing to tell me. But I remember hearing that, and that sort of guided me in the businesses that I go in. And the book was part of it, but even the businesses I've done, the first business I did was buypokerchips.com. It was a poker chip company, which I actually got a lot of flack for, because people are like, oh, you're supporting gambling and this and all of that. And I'm like, no, I sell people home poker chips, so friends can get together with their buddies in the garage and play cards and drink beer and have fun. And human interaction, that's a huge part of life. I think most people, like, they don't really understand how important that is. Now that we're in this pandemic, I think people are really starting to understand that. Yeah. And when we come out of this pandemic, I think people are going to have a new appreciation for that. Just the simple thing of getting together with friends to play cards, right? How important that is. So when I started that business, it was like, I can create a business that will actually improve people's lives, right? Those are the only kind of businesses I want to do, from then on. And the next business was a stand-up paddleboard business. That's the one I went on Shark Tank for. Started in 2010. And a buddy of mine had a saying. He's like, there's no downside to surfing. And I was never a really good surfer, but he's like, you go out, you get fit, you get a suntan. The chicks think you're cool. You're getting fit. Like, there's just no downside. There's no like environmental, aside from like foam surfboards, I guess, if they throw them in the dump, but the activity of it. And it's cheap. You buy the surfboard. There's no lift ticket, anything like that. He's like, there's no downside. This absolutely improves everybody's life. If I could teach everybody to surf, that would improve everybody's life, right? And paddleboarding was basically another version of surfing. Or that's kind of how I learned it in the waves. And I was like, man, I mean, everybody should do this. And then I sort of realized it was more like kayaking, where you can do it on rivers and lakes. So it was, 1% of the population, or probably half of 1% of the population, will even venture out into the surf, could be considered surfers. But with paddleboards, that's a much larger, you're tracking 25, 30% of the population. That's maybe 100 million people or something like that you can introduce this to. They're out in nature, they're getting tan, they're getting fit, they're doing an activity with their friends and family. Like, that's a way to improve people's lives, is to make that product. And I think in the business world today, you see a lot of people just doing business to make money, like a payday lending or something like that. There's these predatory businesses that come around because there's really good money in that, right? Yep. And it's like, to me, that is a malady. That's a cancer, really, on society. Is these people that have the ability to make businesses, they have a skill, they have a natural talent, and they should use that skill for good. And if on the whole, if more people that have that skill use it for good, society sort of thrives. And if on the other side, if more of those people use it, just to sort of line their own pockets, or even at the expense of other people, which is commonplace, and it's considered like acceptable because stockholder share value is the point of a corporate entity, is what everybody will tell you. Yeah. And that is the thinking, and that justifies like stepping on people to for capitalistic means. So, and I am at heart a capitalist. I believe you can make money by creating good things, and you get rewarded for making a good contribution. But at the same time, you can do that with good stuff. Yeah. Then the latest company we've started is Tower Electric Bikes. That's a whole nother business that is life changing for people. There's the eco side of it, which is okay. It's better than driving around fossil fuel cars. But to me, if somebody gets on an electric bike, their eyes go wide and they say, "Holy cow! Like, I can ride this thing like 50 miles. Like, I can do a bike trip with my my son and go downtown in one trip, and I'm not sweating." That's just crazy to me. So when people ride an electric bike, it absolutely makes their life better. They don't have to worry about parking. So those are the types of businesses that I do. And your question really was about the 5-Hour Workday book, but here's how all that ties in. So we were running the paddleboard business, and we had, in 2014, we were named the #1 fastest growing company in San Diego. And the only money we brought in was Cuban's $150,000. And we were a 5-person team at that time, and we did $5 million in revenue. And then the next year, we were number 239 on the Inc. 500 of America's fastest growing companies. And we're basically a surf company in San Diego. And, when we won that award for the fastest growing, like, people were like, what? Like, there were all these venture funded biotech companies, something like this. And then there's this idiot with a surf company that is somehow the fastest growing company. And I'm like, yeah, we've got like an efficient team. We're a direct to consumer. We're using the, e-commerce. It was nothing, earth shattering at that time. And
this is, I think, is this the year that Bezos mentioned you in his letter to stockholders at Amazon?
I think that was 2016 was the year of his letter. But he might have been talking about the previous year or something. But it was all around that same time. Yeah, so I think 2015 or 16 was the height of our revenues. But in 2015, then that was the year that we were on the Inc. 500, it just sort of occurred to me, okay, now we've got a pretty good company, a good start here. I want to make this a big company. Like I want to have, make a dent. How do we take this, $5 million company and make it a $100 million company? So I started reading a lot of, books about branding and stuff like that. And and I read one book and it was like a weird title. It was called like What Great Brands Do. Very to the point, right? And it was analyzing these brands like, Southwest Airlines, and maybe Tesla was in it. I don't remember at the time, but and there were like 7 rules of what great brands do, these great enduring brands. And they were kind of contrarian views. One of them was they don't give back. They don't give back to society. Like they don't, like not Tom Shoes type things where they sell shoes and then they give a shoe to everybody else, right? And Apple was one of these companies, because they don't believe they need to give back, because what they're creating is what they're giving to society. Yeah. Like Southwest Airlines we're making, the ability to travel about the country be about the same price as traveling on a Greyhound bus. That is making society better. So it's not like we need to run our airline and then do some charity on the side here. It's not that they don't do those charity things too, but that's not what drives them, right? They don't feel they don't have to give back, because what they do is the giving back.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but Please. It just reminds me, last year I interviewed Scott Harrison, the founder of Charity Water. And he talks about how he doesn't like the term give back, because what's implicit in that is that you've taken something. So just like what you're saying is, when you're operating and you're serving people, that is your give, right?
Yeah. And Charity Water is just a charity, right? They're not, they don't have another mission, and then they got this sort of side thing. So that is his thing.
Yeah. So we're talking about the 5-hour workday and how this is being a good capitalist.
Yeah. So part of what these great brands did is they lived their brand, right? And I was thinking, okay, what is really our brand? We're a stand-up paddleboard company that says, work hard and cut out early and go out paddleboarding and enjoy your life. Like, don't be that person behind the desk. Go out and paddleboard. This is what we're saying in our marketing, right? Well, we're a startup and we're working these hours, and I got these kids and I'm not paying them very much, and they're working around the clock. We're a startup. And I was like, man, when we're 2 blocks from the beach, we never go to the beach in the afternoon. I'm like, we need to live our brand. And what would our brand look like? And I'm literally reading this book on my patio and watching all these people sort of like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm like, this is actually my life. I cut out of the office whenever the hell I want to, but I don't let my employees do that. But what if you did that with an entire, company? And of course I'd read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week book, right? Yep. And a lot of the principles and how I would live the last 5 or 10 years has been based on that. And you're sort of automating a lot of things, outsourcing stuff, how to be like hyper efficient and use like productivity tools of the modern world. I was using that. My company was using that. That's why we were able to, with that small team, have such successful growth. But I was like, what we need to do? We need to sort of go all in and just sort of stake our brand on this and say, this is what we believe in. We believe the world has changed, and 2 things about the world have changed. And one is, globalization has made things cheaper for people, because all of the middlemen have been, disintermediated. That's why a direct-to-consumer paddleboard company, I can sell you and then ship you a paddleboard for half the price that you can buy that in a retail store, because those distribution channels are broke, and they've been broke for 20 years. And this is all coming, to a head. And you're seeing now with the coronavirus now, like shot this forward another 10 years. And so that part of the world has changed. The problem is that with that change of globalization, what's happened is companies have just sort of taken the extra profit, and consumers still kind of pay the same amount. And you're seeing that even today as, Google and Amazon become these very powerful middlemen. They're now taking 50%. And this is really why we got away from Amazon, and we've had a sort of revenue hit the last few years, is it doesn't make sense to give Amazon 50% of the revenue of a product that somebody buys. Like, that's insanity. We don't actually need Amazon to deliver you a paddleboard. So the middlemen have popped back up, and we're almost back to like retail again. And who's absorbed all of the profits? The corporations. And that's why you have Amazon being, the $2 trillion or $1 trillion, corporation now. So the world has changed there. But on the other side is productivity has changed. We have gone through essentially another industrial revolution in the information age. And it's an industrial revolution of the mind. And when I started looking sort of at how we were working, it was like, well, why are we working this sort of weird day here? Like, I just sort of go in, get my work done, and cut out of there. And sometimes I'll work 7 days a week like that. And I'm like, why do I work like that? Why does everybody else work differently? So the 5-hour workday was essentially just an experiment. There's no magic bullet there. But I said, well, if we start at 8 o'clock and we go, just work 5 hours straight through, 8 to 1, no lunch. We're going to get rid of lunch because there's just a lot of waste in lunch. First, you got like an hour of somebody at lunch, and then you have the commute back and forth to lunch, and then you have the thinking about where you're going to go to lunch, and then after lunch you have the food coma, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, we're not even working this 8-hour day. At the time we were working like 9 to 5, so with an hour lunch. It was only a 7-hour day actually. So I'm like, I'm not even losing anything by going to a 5-hour day because we've eliminated all the questions and the waste around lunch. So I was looking at this from a very capitalistic viewpoint, right? And how can I renegotiate and give my employees sort of the lifestyle that I have? Like if you get in there and you head down, work, and then get out of there. You don't need to like hang around the office, be the last one out of the parking lot to impress me. Get your work done, let it prove with your productivity. So that was what we came up with, was just 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. straight through. And when I told everybody this, I said, we're going to try this for 3 months. And it was like, I think May or June of that year. That was 2015. And I said, so I'm going to basically give you your life back. You're going to walk out the door at 1 o'clock every day. And then you get your weekends off just the same as you do now. You're going to have basically a better life better work week than most people's vacation weeks because you live here in San Diego. You're walking out the door at 1 o'clock. Now, on the other side of this, if you can't figure out how to be as productive or more productive than you are now, I'm going to fire you. And we're going to find somebody who can, because we're going to build a company of all these superhuman workers, because I had a few of them in my company at the time. And I mean, these people were just working at 3 times the speed of the other people. And I just said, I just want people like that.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to reward people like that. Because right now I was rewarding them and I was giving them, 20% more pay or something like that. Completely unfair system. And so that was the experiment. And we did it for 3 months and it worked so well. I mean, productivity really didn't go off. Our revenues went up 50% that year. I was like, let's just stay with it. So we did. And we stayed with it full time for about 2 years.
Wow. Is it something that you still observe, or do you observe seasonally, or how does it work within your company today?
There were like any experiment in a startup, there were unforeseen, problems. Mm-hmm. So there were things that we didn't anticipate that would win well, and things that went bad. Like the productivity really didn't drop off at all, and we changed everything. And while we're an internet company, we had a retail store. So the retail store hours shrank to 8 to 1. We only answered the phone 8 to 1. The warehouse guys, I mean, when they heard this, they're just like, well, it's fine for you guys that are staring at a computer screen. You're not doing anything anyways. It's like, we have to ship the same number of packages and probably more because we're growing this year. And, but nope, they had to shrink that too. And they did they did 10 to 3 because those guys like to surf in the morning. And also we couldn't get the UPS truck to pick up before like 2:30 or something like that. So, but they were in a different building. And so, but everybody figured out how to work at a faster clip. And using the existing tools we were using, sometimes identifying new tools, you got rid of the waste, and people basically started to, identify these productivity tools and how they could work faster. Earlier I was talking about the 2 sides of the world that have changed. And the one side of the world is, globalization has made stuff cheaper for people to buy. You get rid of all the middlemen. The other side is that we can, and all of my entrepreneurial peers are 1,000% more productive than we were 20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And we're still working the 8-hour day. And I think I talked about this in the book a little bit, but I used to go into my mom's office. She managed a bank, like a credit union. And I would go into her office. She had a typewriter on her desk that this was in the, the 80s. And she would type letters to people and put them in an envelope and put a stamp on them and send them off. She's working in a bank, right? I mean, she's got some kind of a computer on her desk, but it's not really a computer you can do anything with except check like ledger balances or something like that. And she's got a phone that's attached to the wall, right? And they're having and I'm like, holy cow, when I was looking at sort of the historical, work statistics of productivity, they're saying we had an 80% increase in productivity between 1971 and 2011. 80%. And I'm like, that's insane. I mean, people should be, rioting in the streets because of that. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if the internet goes out at our office, we just go home because there's no point to even be there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not 1,000% more productive today, you should be angry about it. And the problem is the American workforce is not angry about it. They're just, getting 2 or 3 hours of work done in their 10, 12-hour days and, priding themselves on working a 60-hour workday.
Yeah. As I read your book and I reflected on that, I haven't gone back and done the research myself, but I trusted what you found about, this productivity increasing 80% over that period. But one of the things I reflected on is, yes, productivity has gone up, but profitability has not in, commensurate with productivity. So there's a view where I look at it and I go, well, yeah, we're still working as much or even more, and we're even more productive. So what the heck? But then when you look at the bottom line, that number hasn't increased at that same kind of rate.
Yeah, I think this is an exact point. And a lot of people look at this with my book and they think, well, this is, socialistic, like BS. Uh-huh. I was looking at this from a very capitalistic standpoint. I was saying, I want to squeeze productivity out of my people. I need to renegotiate basically with labor. So yeah, people are not getting any more done. They're literally doing 2 or 3 hours of work in an 8 or 10 hour day. It's a farce by them.
Yeah.
And it's not serving, the bosses or anybody who's paying them. So both sides are being retarded about this. And I think that really is the problem. And we didn't know this at the time, but because I didn't write the book for about a year after we were doing this, I just started writing some articles about what we were doing. Uh-huh. And I started to get crazy shares on this. I would usually get 5 shares of an article. I mean, nobody knew who I was as an author, even, being on Shark Tank. And then, a good article would be 50 shares. Mm-hmm. The first one I wrote about the 5-hour workday got 10,000 social shares. Wow. And I'm like, wow, this has struck a nerve with people. Everybody realizes they're not really doing work at work, and they're wasting their time staying there. But nobody is saying. So then I thought, okay, we're gonna write that book, and we're gonna put a book. The idea wasn't to sell a bunch of these books. We were gonna put a book in every paddleboard package that we sold out. We sell. So that would be 5 or 10,000 of these books would go in, and it would support what the brand of our company, which was that sort of work hard, play hard. And look, we're doing it. We're walking the walk here with our company.
Yeah, for sure. And you've just said it, but you say it quite eloquently in the book you say, what's really happening today is this. Knowledge workers are accomplishing 2 to 3 good hours of work in a day. They might be stretching it across an 8-hour day, but the truth is they're likely only accomplishing 2 to 3 hours of solid productive work. And I raised that with my mother-in-law, who just retired. She had a government job, so but she said, oh yeah, that's exactly what I did. She said, that's what our coworkers did. My coworkers did. And we knew it, And when I look at a book, I don't know if you've seen this one by Mason Curry, he wrote Daily Rituals, How Artists Work. It's a little different because it's talking about creatives and he includes some scientists, but he goes back and looks at people's biographies and their historical profiles, people like Charles Darwin or Benjamin Franklin or, Joseph Heller, different Victor Hugo. And then he pieces together, what were their daily routines like? And what really stood out to me when I read that book maybe 10 years ago was how many of these thinkers, they did only work 2 to 5 hours a day. But part of it was they were in their zone of genius. So they were passionate about what they were doing. They were good at it. And they did it for a long period. So in many cases for decades. But that was enough to create works of lasting cultural value. It's not that people flog themselves and work 16, 20-hour days, to create something like this.
I think that's a critical thing because what we're doing and when you're talking about artists, they have done this, forever. It was always knowledge work that they were doing. This is hard thinking, and doing that sort of hard, high-level thinking, you can only do that a certain number of hours a day. You can work in a factory for 12 hours and your productivity sort of, tails off a little bit. But if you're a genius writer or a genius artist, you can't have your work tail off a little bit. You've got to be super highly productive. And if you're not, you just leave. It's kind of like having the internet or not having the internet. Just don't even be there, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you say this too. I thought this was an interesting view, and it resonates with me. Where you say an 8-hour workday for a knowledge worker is like a 16-hour day for an industrial laborer. And also this insight about, from a strategic business perspective, you're actually hiring knowledge workers for the quality of their minds, right? The truth is, you say, this says in the book, that you can have brilliant people in your office for 5 hours a day, but those most talented minds are actually working 24 hours a day for you. They're always thinking, always solving problems for your business. They're thinking about it in the shower. They're having ideas in the middle of the night. And when those genius minds are well taken care of and well rested, they are unleashed and explosively productive. You're not paying knowledge workers for 8 hours a day of their time.
Yeah, and that's where I didn't even understand. I just assumed when we were switching this that 8 hours has been done forever. And then when
Right.
I started, a year later, started researching for the book, looking at the backstory, I was like, holy cow! Like the 8 hour day was invented basically in the early 1900s, and
Yeah.
there were several movements doing it, but Henry Ford was the one who sort of did it at a grand scale initially, and he had because he had to solve a problem. He had like 70% turnover in his factories because you had the Industrial Revolution, like, ripped through society and nobody changed anything, right? So people were working in sort of workshops before that. All of a sudden they have an assembly line, and this assembly line is a machine that can go 24 hours a day. So, the bosses are like, this is great. We're just going to make these guys work longer and longer hours. And so people were trying to keep up with the machines, and they were literally working 12, 14, 16-hour days, which is what you'll see in a lot of, if you go to China or whatever, you'll see stuff like this happening because the machines are expensive. People are cheap, right? But in America at the time, they were just like, okay, we need the humans to work longer. So they started pushing people to their physical limits. And in the early 1900s, something like 0.5% of the U.S. population or U.S. workforce was being maimed or killed on the job, every year. And 70% turnover in these places like, Ford Motor Company, basically. So you had to constantly retrain people, and people were dying. This was not working. And he sort of realized this is not sustainable. This is where the 8-hour workday came about. He said, okay, well, we're going to do 3 8-hour shifts of people on these machines. The machines will go 24/7, but we'll do these 3 8-hour shifts and just swap the people in and out. And his productivity had gone up. So he also, at the same time, so he shrunk the workday, and he even shrunk they were going 6 days a week, 8 hours a day at first, and then he trimmed it back to 5 days a week, 8-hour days. But when he made that first change, he also doubled their wages. They were making $2.50 a day. He said, I'm going to pay you $5 a day because I realized all these productivity gains. I'm going to shrink your workday. And he did this as a strategic, I want the best workers out there. Kind of like what I was saying. These people are working at 3 times the speed of these people in my company. I just want those people. So that's what he did. Like a month later, he had 10,000 people standing in line to work at his factory. Ford Motor Company, in that period of about 20 years, they went from something like 7% market share in the U.S. auto market to 60%. Because he basically stole the good workforce from all of the others. Because why are you going to work over there if they're paying double the wages and you got these livable hours? And that changed the world. And then everybody started doing that. So then, but that was essentially, it was optimized for people working alongside machines with physical labor. Fast forward to today, nobody's working in factories in America. I mean, we don't work like that. Like what you're talking about with knowledge workers, 8 hours is sort of a completely arbitrary number that has to do with factory floors and, machinery. Why would you possibly do that? So the 5-hour workday was really, and there's a lot of other people doing other stuff, but we're just thinking how work should change, right? We should optimize for today's world, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that, for anybody listening that hasn't been exposed to this idea before, or especially if you're an entrepreneur or you have the influence in your organization to potentially enact something like a 5-hour workday, it's one of those things that at first I would imagine it can seem shocking, like, oh, that would never work here. Or, it's just maybe for other types of businesses or whatever. But when you start looking at it closely, there's all kinds of benefits, I think. Now, I haven't enacted it in my own yet, but one of them is this. I love that you point out that this is effectively, well, first of all, you make the statement, time is the new money, which I thought was a huge insight. So maybe we can touch on that for a moment. But the other thing about this is that it's effectively giving people a raise, right? Without increasing your costs. So as an entrepreneur or as the owner or a leader of an enterprise, that's a very significant thing, even though it's a little distinct from time is the new money, but that, somebody's hourly rate is effectively going up. And me as the owner of the business, I'm not increasing my costs at all. That's a win-win.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely sort of the magic of it for us. We were a startup. I couldn't just all of a sudden, pay my workers a bunch more money if I wanted to increase productivity. But what I could do is I could take my existing staff and make them work at a faster rate. And we're a startup. So even when we went to the 5-hour workday, sometimes we would work a 12-hour day if a container was coming in or we had crunch time or something like that. But if you have people that work at twice the speed, this is why I think this can honestly work for any business, and any business can benefit from it. Maybe you don't go to it year round because I'll touch on some things that we've learned since, and there were some bad things that happened as well. But any company could you go to their workers and just say, hey, for 3 months, we're going to do this 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. We'll figure out how to get your job done or you're going to be fired, as productive more. And all of a sudden people will just start scrambling and they'll say, okay, we don't want to lose this. So we're going to do this. And I love walking out the door. So they're motivated. You've given them the motivation that basically an entrepreneur has. You can have this better life if you just sort of work at a faster pace while you're there. And they're going to identify all these productivity tools. They're going to learn how to work faster, basically. They're going to stop being on Facebook and doing fantasy football at work and whatever, because they're literally not going to have enough time. And they're going to fear maybe getting fired if they don't. And then at the end of the 3 months, you say, okay, we're going back to regular hours. Well, you've just trained your entire workforce to work at twice the speed. So from a business owner's perspective is, holy cow, that was like summer efficiency training. That is perfect. And that can work for any company. I don't care if it's, in building buildings or something like that. A lot of people say this works fine for knowledge workers because that's kind of what it's designed for. But I think it works very well for, the modern world because you really need, a lot of things are being like rethought, like how we do stuff.
Yeah.
I was talking to I was on the Adam Carolla show, and he was he was like a carpenter when he was younger. He's like, it'll work for this stuff, but it's not going to work for the guy laying, the carpenter or whatever. And I said, no, okay, here's the example for you. If you've ever seen somebody drywall a house, like those guys that come in, they've got like stilts on, they've got like a hammer in each hand. I mean, these guys it's crazy. Like they're using like technology basically to put up drywall. But if you ever try to put up drywall yourself, you can do it. And then the tape, and it's just going to take you 10 times longer. You bring these guys in and they can fly at this faster pace. So if you look at that and you say, okay, we want to apply 5-hour day principles to, putting up drywall. Well, the first step is you would get these guys with all these stilts and the hammers and, train them up. And okay, so now they can work at 10 times the speed of those other people. That was the sort of tools. We started using tools. But now people are rethinking like, well, maybe we shouldn't use drywall in houses. Maybe you should just 3D print that thing. Like maybe drywall is just really a dumb idea. And so what the 5-hour workday does is it puts an unrealistic constraint. You say, all of a sudden, you only have this amount of time and you're going to get fired if you don't do it. So you start like pulling out like really crazy ideas and testing them. And that's what startups do, is they have constraints built into them. You got no cash. You got no people. You've got nobody knows who you are. You have crazy constraints, and it forces you to come up with creative things. That's how like industry giants get disrupted, right? So how do you take a company and put artificial constraints on? So that's really what the key of the 5-hour workday is about, is an unrealistic constraint and just see how people react.
Yeah. No, I can see how that could have a very beneficial effect. Tell me, if you will, please, about how has this experiment unfolded and where are you today?
Yeah, so there were some unintended circumstances here. So we're in the paddleboard industry. That was a booming industry. As I said, we were this fast-growing company. Our revenues went from literally like $250,000 a year to $1.3 million a year to $3.1 million a year to $5 million a year to $7.5 million a year. And so breakneck speed. And everybody saw what we were doing, and they sort of copied, basically. So in any product you're selling online, things just sort of get commoditized over time. So that business became more competitive and just a lot more people doing it. And sort of the newness of it wore off. Like initially people were paddleboarding because they saw, Elle McPherson in, People magazine, like paddleboarding. Oh, that's cool. They'll try paddleboarding. So it was driven by, media trends. It was a fad. And I was worried like the poker chips, because they were a fad too. Poker was on TV, it exploded, and then it tailed off, and that company's like 1/10 the size of it was. And I was very paranoid about this. So we started to cap out, and then we started to come down, and I was getting like very concerned. So there was that perspective for me. I was much less willing to do experiments in the workplace when that situation happened. But the other thing that happened at the exact same time, I had 9 employees at the time, and I lost 4 of them within a 90-day period.
Wow.
And this was in, I think, like 2017, early 2017, like the spring. And I lost my general manager, and I fired one of the people, but the other 3 quit. And, one went to travel in a van across the country with her boyfriend. Another moved to Mexico to live in with her boyfriend or something. These kids were all sort of at the young age where they move around a lot anyways. And then another one went to sort of like an agency type thing. But I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. These kids are in their 20s. They're getting paid very well at the time, because once you're there for a couple of years, and they have a 5-hour workday and they're leaving. It doesn't make any sense to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we hadn't really had that problem before. And I was like, something's broke here. And when I really like analyzed what was going on, we had lost our company culture. We were a startup. And when you're a startup, it's kind of like going to war, and you're in the trenches, like, and you're working together 12 hours a day, weekends and all this stuff. And you form really close bonds with those people. Okay, you change the company and you all walk out the door at 1:00. It's great for your personal life. It really opens up, the other stuff, but you become much less close to those people you work with. And when people leave a company, you kind of leave the people of the company. That's more. So it's really hard to leave a company if you, like, your best friend works there, right?
Yeah, for
People
sure.
don't do that. And so we broke the company culture by going away from a startup. And at the same time, things were coming down. And I'm just like, either they, when we started the 5-hour workday, people had earned it that were there. And so they were still working. And now we had hired on people that had never known any other workday.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a bit of entitlement. We lost the company culture, and then the revenues are starting to go down. So I said, screw this. We're going to change it. We're going to tweak. I want to go to a startup again, but I love how this is forcing people to think. So we started to do 4 summer months, which is when we did 70% of our revenue. So from June 1st to the end of September, we did the 5-hour workday then, which is sort of counterintuitive, but I want to squeeze people. I want to say, it's crazy times. I'm putting an unrealistic constraint on you. You got to figure out how to survive. And then in the off season, when we got much less to do with just shipping paddleboards and answering phone calls and stuff like that, where we do more of our project work, I want us to go to startup hours. So we made it a sort of a hybrid of those two. And that's what we've been doing the last, 2017, 2018, 2019, coming into this year. We had some other issues. The paddleboard business sort of continued to decline a little bit. We got into some sort of finance issues, basically. And so there were other concerns, and then the coronavirus hit. And even going into the coronavirus, I was kind of like, we got to sort through our financial issues. Like, we can't, be having money problems, and I can't be saying, okay, let's, go to a 5-hour workday for the summer. So I said, we gotta tighten down. We're going to skip it this year. So that's what we did. The coronavirus hit. We had one of our businesses is an event company, Tower Beach Club. That went to zero overnight. We saw everything was going down, so we dropped the price of our paddleboards about 30%. We got off of Amazon almost completely, and we just said, okay, we're going to be the true direct-to-consumer company. And all of a sudden, sales went up 400%, overnight. And then 3 weeks later, the coronavirus effect hit. The coronavirus was already in process, but nobody had the notion that this was actually going to boost some businesses. And getting outside on a paddleboard was one of those. And our e-bikes was another one. So both of those businesses took off. So now we've doubled revenue this year. Everything is going in a good way. And we've skipped the 5-hour workday. We're not on it right now. But now I'm going to layer it back in. And I'm thinking, how can I do this such that we can, when we're on the downward trend, and we got to work more, because sometimes you just have to throw brute force at things.
Yep.
We can do that. And then how can I reward people when we do? So I'm thinking, and I haven't even told the staff this yet, but I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're going to change the months from August, September, October, November. So those 4 months. So it's kind of the tail end of our season, but part of our project season, because that's going to work more, and we're not not working when we need to be working. But also we're going to do that based on whether our revenues went up the previous year or went down. So if revenues increase, that's the bonus. That's the Christmas bonus is we have the 5-hour workday, and everybody that was in the company at that time earned it every year. So that's another I'm looking at this as sort of an experiment.
Yep.
And that's the next tweak we're going to do to this experiment.
Right on. Well, I really admire that willingness to, first of all, face reality, and then to respond to it in a way that something other than just curling up in the fetal position. Yeah.
Another thing was with this sort of 5-hour workday, because the book got a lot of press. We didn't really expect that. We hired a PR agency when we were going to try to do that because it aligned with our brand, but it ended up getting press in 20 countries. I did 5 or 6 national TV interviews here in the US. It got a lot of press. We didn't sell a lot of books, Press doesn't equate to selling books, apparently, but we got a ton of press for this. And you kind of fall in love with the idea that it was your idea too. And then when the company was going down, it was kind of like, well, we can't get away from the 5-hour workday because that was my idea. We need to stake our belief on that. So that was a tough thing for me, just my ego to sort of get around to, is saying, it might work, it might not work. I need to stand back and be objective about this. So I'm trying to do that now.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, before we transition, a couple more questions in this section. The first one is a little bit maybe off the topic, or maybe it's not. But in the book, you mention that something that has served you well in your time as an entrepreneur are lessons you've learned from, I think it's Vishen Lakhiani at Mind Valley.
Yeah.
What have you learned from him that has been of benefit to you?
I'm going to have to go back. What did we say in the book there? Because, there's a lot of things. I don't know exactly which things come from which people. With the Mind Valley guy, a lot of his stuff was company culture. I remember when we were doing that, one of the things when we rolled out the 5-hour workday, here's one thing for sure, was this idea of gratitude. Mm-hmm. And I think it was either the guy with the Mind Valley thing or another guy that wrote the 5-minute journal. Are you familiar with that book?
Oh, yeah.
I forget his name. He's like a tall Russian guy, kind of. But it was this idea of gratitude and the expression of gratitude on a daily basis. So we started having the whole company on we had a Slack channel that was called Daily Gratitude. And everybody was supposed to, when they got up, they would, list 3 things that they were grateful for every day, shared to the company. So instead of like personally journaling this, we were just sharing that. So it was getting everybody's, mind in the right place. And a lot of this was, at the time, we were experimenting with workplace design, basically. Mm-hmm. Like we were experimenting with the workday. People were walking out the door earlier, but we also wanted to think, we also rolled out a 5% profit sharing at the time. And then we had people vote every month on who they should get the profit sharing. Some of this went really badly. And then we did the daily gratitude because we thought that would get people the science on it that we heard was that if you, for a month's period, if you get up every day and say 3 things that you're grateful for, write it down, your happiness basically bumps up by like 25, 30%. And I'm saying you're managing people's energy, right? You're trying to get knowledge workers to do good work. They need to be in a happy place, basically. Like if, so-and-so just broke up with her boyfriend, she's a mess. She's not getting any work done, like those social things so how do you get those people happy? So we were trying all of these things at the same time. I don't know if that one came from, how do you say his name? Vishkin?
I think it's Vishen Lakhiani.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure which ones exactly came from him. I went to a conference. It was the Internet Underground conference, and his wife was there, and we were on a little project. So we were out doing something. So maybe it was something she told me they were doing or something.
Right on. Do you guys still do the gratitude thing?
We don't. So when we got away from the 5-hour workday, we had sort of revenues come down. A lot of those experiments, they were sort of luxury experiments is what I would call them. So a lot of that we got rid of. We got rid of the profit sharing. We also did 2 all-company trips every year. We haven't done one of those in about a year. We're just about the point to getting back to those. And we also did something called Tower Tuesdays, which every Tuesday we would get like after work, because we were out at 1, we would get the whole company together. It started once a week, and then we're like, well, that's just too much. We don't want to be around these people like that much. It seems like it's a lot, right? You got to have a really tight company culture to get everybody together. So then we started doing that every 2 weeks, then every month, and that sort of faded out. So there were experiments.
No, I love that. I love that spirit of entrepreneurialism and testing. So, okay. Well, with your permission, let's go ahead and transition to the Enlightening lightning round. So again, this is a variety of questions. My aim is, for the most part, to ask the question and stand aside. I might tug a little bit on an answer here or there, but you're welcome to answer as long as you want. Okay, first question. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a
adventure.
All right. Question number 2. Here I'm borrowing Peter Thiel's famous question. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
With that one, I think, and this really goes to our company, what we're about, is you don't get what you pay for. I mean, people say you get what you pay for. Mm-hmm. That's not true anymore. you get what marketing you pay for today. It used to be like you could use price to sort of judge things, and whether it was quality or not, because that is the assumption that everybody is using the same distribution channels to get it to you. Now, when distribution channels have changed and you got one person using this distribution channel, somebody going direct to consumer or something like that, that gets thrown out the window. You don't get what you pay for anymore. And the problem is that marketer and people have been indoctrinated into you get what you pay for. So to the point where, luxury companies trying to sell you a diamond or a watch, they just say, well, what should we charge for this? And they just say, well, we're going to charge $10,000. Well, those guys charge $10,000. Let's charge $15,000. Yeah. And then, some brilliant marketer says, we're going to charge $80,000 for that watch. and people don't really understand that. They still think like, oh, well, that $3,000 purse is better than that $20 purse. We don't live in that world anymore. So you're paying for the marketing BS that you're getting for most of the stuff you pay for. And if you want to be basically take advantage of sort of globalization, you need to understand the distribution channels of the products that you buy and really look, is this a good product or is it a bad product? And don't look at price so much because it's misleading. And it's too bad because that was really easy if you could just figure out which ones are good from the price.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Okay, question number 3. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a t-shirt with a slogan on it or a phrase or a saying or a quote or a quip, what would the shirt say?
I've always been a big fan of Bob Marley. So like One Love. Right I think the sad thing about Bob Marley is now people like assume they like look at Bob Marley and they say, okay, this guy was all about, marijuana and, this but really like he was like sort of a revolutionary person on like bringing the races together and the world together. And that has all got like, sort of set aside. Yeah. And people are just like, he was just about smoking pot, which is the stupidest thing ever. He was like an amazing dude that, really was about changing the world on the level of like a Martin Luther King. And everybody just thinks like, he's a pot smoker.
Yeah. Question number 4. What book, other than your own, have you gifted or recommended most often?
I really like Richard Branson's books. There's a couple that are kind of the same type of book, like Finding Your Virginity is a book that I really like. That would probably be the one that I've given most. The 5-Hour Workday, that had not the 5-Hour Workday, excuse me, the 4-Hour Workweek had a big impact on my life. So I've shared that with my entrepreneurial friends. Really, the 5-Hour Workday was applying that to entire organizations, but a lot of the principles in that, are the same. Most of the books I read are for business purposes. Mm-hmm. So I read much less where, I got this great novel.
Yeah. What are you reading
mostly
currently?
Business books.
Yeah.
I'm not reading anything. What is the book? I have one book that I don't know what I've been reading. Nothing comes off the top of my head.
Okay.
Mostly it's Inc. magazine, Fast Company magazine, those types of things.
Right on. All right. Question number 5 is about travel. So you travel a lot. You've traveled a lot in your life. What's one travel hack, meaning something you do or something you take with you when you travel to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
I mean, the biggest thing I've learned is to like the things that go wrong with travel, right? Like you can actually get around those. Like, you can get a money belt. You can travel in like very dangerous places if you do it correctly, right? Like if you scan your passport, get some money in, other accounts where if your credit cards get stolen or something like that. And then you can it frees you up to travel to places that you wouldn't go usually because, that place is too dangerous, or I might get mugged, or this might happen. That's the biggest thing is the preparation in how you prepare for that and have sort of, redundancy built in and backup plans because then you can travel and be safe. And this is something that you apply to business as well. It's like a lot of people think like entrepreneurs are like they're risk takers and doing stuff like this, but you can actually do that if you set up these sort of just fail safes. So that makes your travel more enjoyable to me. Maybe a lot of people would think that you're worrying about just stupid stuff. Just go and have fun. Nope. You set up the ground rules and then go have fun.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay. Question number 6. What's something you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
Started or stopped doing? Yeah. This is, there was a guy named James Clear. Do you know James Clear? He's an author.
Yeah, Atomic Habits.
Yeah. So one day I saw him at a conference or whatever. We had some beers and he was talking on stage too. And one of the things he was talking about, I think, was like flossing your teeth or something. And so I just started for the first time, like flossing my teeth. like on a regular basis. He's like, you're either a flosser or you're not a flosser. And you can really sort of change your personal opinion about yourself. And I think the premise of his book was you do it for 17 days in a row, and then all of a sudden you see yourself as a flosser. So that's a really like trivial thing, but somebody with stronger willpower could apply that to like a lot of areas of their life.
Right on. All right. Thank you for that. Question number 7. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
I mean, right now, it's a tough time in America, right? So I think the thing that I wish Americans knew is, truly what makes America great. Like not the slogan, not the racist undertones of this, but what really does make America great. Is it that we're the biggest economy? Well, no, you have like China's almost as big as economy, but if, Chinese become wealthy, they move to the US, right? Is it because we have this incredible military? You have Russia as an incredible military, but nobody wants to live, in Russia. I mean, Russians move here, right? Is it, so all of these things that we hang our hat on, or that the Republic, I don't want to get overly, political here, but I think the things that we think are great about our country, who cares? They're just sort of an offshoot of what truly does make this, great, which is essentially the democratic process coupled with the Bill of Rights. So, you're going to have this sort of mob rule, which everybody is scared of, but that's how the democratic process works. But you got to have an underlying, catch that, okay, we're not going to break these things. And once you have those, and, few countries in the world had that before the U.S. had that, and some have copied and some have failed. But if you have those two things together, it creates a self-correcting entity. So we can be a country that is, founded with slaves, and then you can abolish slavery. Like you can get through that. You can work through that. And then, a black man can be president of the United States. Same thing. You can have, women like not have the right to vote. And now, a woman is potentially going to be, a vice president. So there's a self-correcting nature of that. Yeah. And that self-correcting nature leads to having the greatest economy, having the greatest military and those things. And we're getting too caught up in, what makes us great and our flag and this stuff. And we're going to give up really what does make the country great. Yeah. You don't want to lose those protections and those critical things. Diversity makes America great, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, question number 8. What's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about making relationships work?
It's not necessarily my strong suit, and I sort of learned this. I'm divorced. I've never had good relationships or whatever. I have great friends with people, but it's not my strong suit. I think I'm much more of an analytical thinker and stuff like that. And so an interesting thing happened in our company on the way we were growing the company up. So I finally matched myself with somebody. I made this girl, her name was Allison Dunovich. I made her general manager of the company, very young girl, but she had an interest in, HR and people and company culture and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff we did, the Vish and Lanky stuff that we did was sort of her idea. And so when me and her got together, and it was almost like the father and mother of a company running. And so and that made the company much more successful, and it made the people. So you need to have sort of a strategic direction and sort of these business chops, but you also need to have the personal side. And, we've sort of lost that in our business. And I think when you lose that, you sort of lose your way. You can be pretty good with just sort of your strategic and your analytical stuff, but you need to marry that with sort of the personal part. And that's how you make magic happen in companies. And I think that's kind of why a lot of times there's like co-founders of companies, is because it's very rare for that duality to be within one person. And I think with myself, I've sort of identified that is definitely a weakness. And if I can bring that in, that makes the team stronger. And I think you got to think about your personal relationships in the same way. Yeah. What are you good at? And sort of match that with somebody else. And then, you raise children, and they're going to be more balanced,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, thank you for that answer. Okay. And the final question here in the Enlightening Lightning Round is about money, which is, what's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about money, or what's something you're always sure to do with it or you never do with it?
I mean, I think the biggest thing about money is that money isn't real. And I don't think people understand that it, because, and I learned this while I was sort of, that backpacking trip, if I go back to Australia, 3 months, that entire backpack trip, I think I spent $7,000 for a 3-month, vacation. And that's the flights, and that's our, the hostels we stayed in. And you could have done that for half of that. I mean, we were what were considered like high rolling backpackers. Like we would take a limo to the casino, when we were in part of Australia, and, we were going out and eating out and doing stuff like that. Now, if I go with, some buddies to, Vegas or whatever, you can spend that in a weekend. Right. Mm.
Oh yeah.
And that was a life-changing experience. And, your bottle service, at the Las Vegas pool is fun, but it's not life-changing. So you make more money, you spend it on stupid stuff, and everybody's sort of, chasing that. And they're essentially slaves to money. And that's a really dumb thing to be, because at a certain point you have to realize that it's not real. Like, it's not real. Like, and if you, it's so weird. And this is what I think you can only get by traveling around the world and seeing. I was in South Africa, and we were traveling in the townships. Have you been to the townships in South Africa?
I've not yet been to South Africa.
Okay, so South Africa is very interesting because, the Cape Town is the town we were in, and on one side you have America's Cup, and it's just super nice and ritzy and stuff like that. And you walk one street, and a lot of towns are like this, but then it's it's crazy. Like, there's crackheads everywhere and just dangerous. And then the townships are sort of these encampments where they put, it's just, basically black people. It's like a 50% unemployment rate there. And, the kids are playing with, dirt and sticks and just running around, but they're pretty happy, And I was taking a tour, like a touristy tour of this thing. And my tour guide was, I was sort of chatting, sort of a lot of downtime there. And he was like, "Oh, you're from America, whatever." And we got to talking about family or something like that. I'm like, "I'm divorced." Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He was like, "Nah, it's not a big deal. And divorce happens in America. It's 60% of marriages end up in divorce." And he's like, he's hitting me on the back going, that's funny. That's funny. And I'm like, "No, that's what it is." And he's like, "There's no way. What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's pretty common. I think in most of the Western world, 50% of marriages end in divorce." And he's like, he wouldn't believe me. Right. Wow. And I said, "Well, what's the divorce rate here?" And he's like, "Well, 1 in 20, probably 5%. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So you got 50% unemployment here. You've got just crazy conditions, and the people are happy, and the divorce rate is really low. Why is that? And that's because money isn't real. In my opinion, it's just, it's how you look at it. It's how you compare yourself to other people in the environment you're in. And I think people look to money and they think this is going to solve a lot of problems. It makes just as many problems as it solves. And
yeah.
So that's a big thing for me.
Right on. Well, thank you for that answer. Okay. So the very final question here is kind of a gimme. It's, if people want to learn more from you or they want to connect with you, what would you have them do?
I would definitely read the book, The 5-Hour Workday. I think you can learn a lot about, our company and sort of, what we did there. You can take a look at the products that we sort of brought into the world, which is Tower Paddleboards, Tower electric bikes, even the bikepokerchips.com. All of those products, whether you know it or not, they will improve your life. Whether you buy it from my company or another company in that space, those types of products, I think, can absolutely add to people's life. I'm not too big on Twitter. You can probably find me on Facebook if you search my name, but I'm not really like a social media influencer. I don't really strive to be, but you could probably find me. But more importantly, I would say follow the companies. If you look at at Tower Beach Club, that kind of encompasses our Tower Paddleboards, Tower electric bikes. You can see our social media stuff on there. If you want to get in touch with us, just go to any of those websites and just email the, whoever the customer service email, and it'll get to me. We're a very small company. Right now there's 4 people in our company.
Right on. Okay. Thank you for that. As an expression of gratitude to you for making time to talk with me and share your knowledge and experience with everybody listening, I've gone online to kiva.org and I've made a $100 microloan to a woman in Liberia, a female entrepreneur named Luvania, who will use this money to buy charcoal and rice and milk and soap that she will then sell. She's married. She has 5 kids. So this will improve the quality of life for her, her family, and people in her community. So thank you for giving me a reason to do that.
Cool. Thank you, man. It's an honor for me to be on your show.
Well, I know we're just about at the end of our interview here. One thing that you say writing articles and being a thought leader is one of my favorite parts of marketing. It's kind of, to me, interesting. I know content marketing is a thing. What's your routine like when it comes to writing?
Well, all of the businesses that I'm in are driven. They're sort of search engine optimization businesses. So you're creating great content. Like even with the poker chip, my whole strategy here was you create a library that sells stuff. You educate people. You educate the customers, the people that are in poker, and they're going to say, "This dude educated me. I like him. I'm going to buy something from him." Is essentially. So to me, that is good marketing. Like when I was studying marketing in school, and I would go home and try to explain to my mom, what I was doing. She would be like, "Oh God, where did we go wrong? Why did our son become a marketer?" I mean, marketing has such a dirty connotation, and for good, right? Like she thought I was going to robocall her and
send her some direct mail or something.
Back in the day, and she's just like, "Yeah, they're ruining the world." And my view is that just like business, you can do it for good or bad, and marketing, you can do it for good. There's good ways to do marketing. Like in our companies now, we almost like this year, I think we spent 0.4% of our revenue on advertising. I refuse to advertise now because I think Google is becoming a monopoly and they're taking 50% of the revenue and consumers are just getting screwed and they're just sucking all the profit out of that part of the business. Amazon, I don't want to sell on Amazon anymore. They're just sucking all of the profit out of it. We've got these really unhealthy things going on in the world of buying stuff. And I'm sort of opting out of that because I'm anti that marketing. Like some of the other companies, specifically in like the paddleboard industry, there's companies that spend more on marketing, on advertising, than they do on the product. And to me, that's just insulting on so many levels, like to human intelligence and to just like, we're going to manipulate you and we're going to manipulate you to such an extent that you're going to pay more for us to tell you about the product than what you're actually buying. This gets back to that question you asked about, you don't get what you pay for, right? What is the thing that you believe? I believe that deeply. Like it's crazy to me that we're in that world where it's such the illusion. The smoke show is more important than the hat is bigger than the cowboy, or however they say that.
Yeah.
And that just that turns me off. And I think what content marketing can be in its truest form can be education that gets your message out there. So you're helping these people, and you're also by helping them, you're helping them find out about your company and to sell them a product. And I think that's the highest form of marketing, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that ethos of give before you ever ask, right? And the law of reciprocity, I think, is a real thing.
Sure.
And so forth. So,
and it's a long-term world. People don't realize that because things move so fast now.
Yeah.
And I think, in my opinion, the brands that are going to be around like 20 years from now are not going to be the direct-to-consumer brand that raises $100 million and pumps in a bunch of dollars into ads and sells you some widget that you can buy in 50 other places. I think it's the slow growth companies are going to be the great companies of the future that are authentic brands.
Yeah.
And I think you can have a slow play strategy in today's world and be very successful with that, and even more successful, because I think at some point people are going to clue in to we're being manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is as this conversation unfolds that I don't know that I'd seen before, it really is also about the power of relationships. That again, this is not a transactional thing, but like you're saying, it's a long-term viewpoint. And when you're giving to someone, you're building a relationship, and that counts for a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the way the world is going to go. And because you can contact anybody. Like, you can get in touch with me, I can get in touch with you. We don't even know each other.
Yeah.
And there's no barrier to that. And when you have that, people are going to do that, and relationships become like very important. And you want to curate those. And that's really what building a business is. It's just a snowball of relationships that you build. Yep. And that's what a brand is.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about the process of this book becoming a reality. What was the moment you knew you were going to write it? And then what process did you follow? How did you outline it? How did you manage your time? What were your working sessions like? Who else was involved? Like anything and everything about the book going from an idea to a printed and digital reality.
Now, this is probably going to be something contrary to what you usually hear because you deal with some like hardcore authors. I don't consider myself an author. Like I struggled with English. Like it took me like 5-6 hours to write, a 5-paragraph essay in high school. This was not a skill that I was good. I was good in the math and science and stuff like that. But English was not my strong suit. And I would have never thought I would write a book. I mean, that would be crazy, crazy talk. Because I was writing those articles, I could stomach doing an article, and we were doing that because it was marketing. It was getting our message out there and bringing people to us. We started to have success with that. I thought, probably we could write a book about that. But I'm like, God, I don't want to write a book. I have no interest in writing a book. That sounds miserable to me. And I was at a conference. I think it was the Mastermind Talks conference, and one of the speakers was Tucker Max. The guy who wrote,
I hope they serve beer.
Yeah, yep. and then the movie, and he was talking about this company that he started called Book in a Box. And it was kind of a stupid name, and I'm just like, so he does, and it was like at the time it was like $15,000, and they would basically do a bunch of interviews with you, and they would transcribe that overseas and bring it back, and they would have like real people who wrote books like interview you. And first they would have like a guy that did like how movies have like an arc.
Yep.
This guy would collect all of the knowledge that you had in your head. Typically, it was like CEOs of businesses and stuff like that. And okay, here's the knowledge you have. Here's how we make an arc to that. And then so they set the sort of the outline of the book. And then you interview with another guy that sort of pulls out your information. Then they transcribe that stuff overseas, bring it back, and an editor puts that down and then sort of edits it down to good words. And then they go back and forth with you. And this is the company he built. And the reason that he built this company was he was like saying, okay, you've got this history of how many people have lived on the world, right? Mm-hmm. All of these brilliant people. And a lot of times, a lot of this knowledge was not recorded, right?
Yep.
And the only time it ever got recorded is when two things like dovetailed perfectly. Like this person had this expertise, knowledge, or experience in life, and he was also interested in writing, right?
Yeah.
That's where the history of the world comes from, and the advance of society, and the written that somebody else could take that book 100 years later and then make some other advance. Those two things had to dovetail. So he's like, that's craziness, right?
Yeah.
Like he wrote, about serving beer in hell. He didn't have anything to write about. He still wrote a book. He sold a bunch. So he's a good writer. He didn't have really a good idea, right? So he was like, I'm going to bring these two things together. And I thought, this is brilliant. Like, this is a world-changing idea. Like, go get those people that have no interest in writing a book, but actually have something to say. Get them together with the book people. And so I started talking to him. I'm like, it's only $15,000. That seems cheap. Like, you should raise your prices. Like, that seems incredibly great because that's even like a tax write-off. And he's like, yeah, here's how the process goes. And I'm like, okay, so I got to do 2 phone interviews here, and then 6 or 7 more interviews here, and then a couple weeks of the editing. And you got a guy to do the cover work? I'm like, sold. This sounds great. And here's what I'm going to write the book on because I've been writing these articles. So that's how it came to fruition. There wasn't a master plan to do the 5-Hour Workday and then come out with a book. It was just a coincidence of events that happened around that I said, for $15,000, I can start putting this book in. I'm surely going to sell. My break even on that is I got to sell another 100 paddleboards to people that read this book and then that are interested enough in this that they tell their friend. Because just having a paddleboard isn't that noteworthy, but there's this crazy little company in California that's doing a 5-hour workday. This is nuts.
Yeah.
And then we're going to sell more paddleboards was my thought. And that's how the book came to fruition. So it was the lazy man's way to write a book. But in my opinion, that's the 5-hour workday way to write a book.
Oh, yeah.
This book is actually, pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, and they got it out. And once they got the book out, we had like the sort of most of the content in there. Because I mentioned earlier that, Richard Branson's books are some of my favorite because he puts a lot of his life into it.
Yep.
What got him to that point and what he got into that. So at the end of that, I talked with the guy, and I became really good friends with the guy who was the main editor on my book. Uh-huh. And I said, I'd like to put some of these personal stories into this book because, why we came to that decision, it was basically based on this childhood, thing here. And so that was, we sort of, added to that to make it more of like an interesting read. So that was interesting. And the guy who wrote that book actually years later maybe 2 years ago, I started another company called nomiddleman.com, which is an aggregation of all of the best direct-to-consumer companies in the world. We're building basically the anti-Amazon. And we don't take any share of profits, but we put them all in there and make it easily searchable. You want to find direct-to-consumer shoes. Okay, here's the 3 to 5 companies to look at. And he was a big fan of the 5-Hour Workday and that concept. And he was also a fan of this disintermediation of these strong middlemen. And so I hired him on to help me work with that. That project is still live and it's up there, but he had a baby. He's off doing other stuff now. So it's kind of in hibernation right now. But,
right on.
5-10 years from now, we may, that may be something that you hear about.
Yeah.
nomiddleman.com.
That's awesome. Well, good. Well, given your experience and not having seen yourself as an author, but having written a book nevertheless, what advice or encouragement would you leave anyone listening with who is interested to finish their own creative project, whether they're in the middle of it and haven't managed to cross the finish line, or they haven't even started because maybe they don't know what they don't know, or they're afraid to for some reason? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think if you have like something to say, and this is like when I talked to Tucker and went to him and his, he handed me off basically to, one of the other guys there. The big thing is they were just not like taking everybody that wanted to write a book. Basically, they were only going to do books about people that actually had something to say. So I would say that's the first thing you should really ask yourself. Is this sort of a vanity project to say that I have written a book, or do you have something to say? And it's kind of like in business, the same thing. If like you're just doing it for the money, you're not going to be successful. It's not going to be that good. There's going to be a lot of like crap that happens. You're probably not going to finish this, right? With the book, I think it's the same thing. Like if you really have something to say, and if you do, even if you're not willing to write it, like you're not going to give a year of your time, use a book service. Like I forget, they changed their name from Book in the Box to something else now.
To Scribe.
To Scribe. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And a lot of people would say, well, yeah, like I had a lot of people, like, especially in my interviews, that because I explained how I wrote that book, and they're like, well, you're not an author, you cheated. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, it was, I had something to say and it got written. Yeah. I think that's like, using an electric bike is cheating. No, it still gets people out on bikes. It gets people out enjoying the world. Like, that's crazy. Don't let that discount it. So if you have something to say, by all means, use something like that, especially if you're a busy dude. Like, that is the best path to go. Now, on the other side, if you're just an incredible writer, and, I know a lot of these people that are just like, I would spend 5 or 6 hours writing my 5-hour essay. They would come in a half an hour before class and just whip something out and get an A on it. I'm like, my God, you're like a magician. That is like a magic skill. Yeah. If you have that skill, you should be writing stuff, and you're a writer. And what you need to do is you need to go out and force yourself to experience life and then write about those experiences. Even if you have nothing to write about, you have a duty to go try some shit and then write about that experience, because you have a way to bring that into the world. And you got to force that you to have something to say if you're a writer, because it's like a musician. Like if you're an incredible musician, but you don't really have the lyrics or whatever, you should force that.
Yeah. Don't
would be my advice to writers. Yeah.
Don't hide that under a bushel.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, Stephan, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. And again, I'm grateful to you for making time to talk with me. I'm grateful that you wrote this book, that you're doing the work you're doing. I don't know when or where our paths will cross again next, but I suspect they will. And I'll definitely let you know when this podcast releases, and stay in touch somehow. So
awesome. It was great to have a conversation with you, Brilliant.
Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself, in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.